Here in Mexico.
Very kind, thank you.
Welcome. First, I'd like you to share with us how was the experience to work with Terry Notary, this wonderful artist who first started at the Cirque du Soleil, and was your partner portraying Buck, this presentar.
Well, as you mentioned, Terry Notary is a gifted physical artist. He's a former gymnast and worked with Cirque du Soleil. And we used Terry to represent Buck and to perform the activities that we would later illustrate through computer-generated graphics. But for me to have some place to look and someone to react to, something to react to, we employed Terry Notary. He was brilliant. He was really very useful to the process. I'm very grateful for his help.
And well, The Call of the Wild is a classic in American culture. And now this movie shows us this journey of your character, John Thornton and Buck. But do you think that telling the story from the dog's point of view makes it different? It's more like an emotional trigger or something like that?
Well, I think it's a shared point of view. In the book, the character that I play, John Thornton, has no background, no backstory. We don't know where he comes from. He comes into Buck's life at an important moment, and he's critical to saving Buck and to allowing his journey to continue, Buck's journey to continue. So he's an invention outside of the book, that character. And we wanted to have his story parallel Buck's story, but be a human story. And it's almost the reverse. John Thornton is a man who left his civilized environment, his home, his family, because of a personal tragedy in his family. His son has died. And he runs away to Alaska to escape his emotional problem. And he finds Buck, and together they're useful to each other. And it's really a story of Buck's seeking his natural place in the world, and it's a story of John Thornton gaining the courage through his relationship with Buck to be able to resume his responsibilities in his life.
Vamos a abrir la sesión de preguntas y respuestas y vamos a comenzar con Arturo Tobar, por favor, de Movix.
Hi, Ms. Ford. It's such a pleasure having you here. Thank you. Hi. It's a pleasure having you here in Mexico.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, was it much of a challenge working with a fully generated computer dog? Was it easier for you having someone being your reference point, or would you have rather had a real dog?
I've worked with real dogs before in movies, and it's always a little complicated. You know, it takes a lot more time. And you don't always get exactly what it is you're hoping for. But no, the job of actor is to pretend that there's something happening that is not. And so it's not really that much more difficult. And for me, I enjoyed it. It was a different kind of challenge, and it really became effortless. but there was a certain physical intimacy with the dog and with Cherry Notary that seemed a little bizarre at first. I was petting him behind the ears for the first week and really thinking about it, but I got over that fairly quickly. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah, I grew up with dogs, although I was raised in the city of Chicago. We had a dog in our family when I was about 10 years old, I think, for the first time. And I've had dogs ever since. In my family now, we have 3 dogs. And, we've always had rescue dogs, dogs that come from animal shelters or that people can't keep. And we're dog people. And my son and my wife are also very fond of our dogs, and they're part of the family. So that is an experience that I have had, very similar to John Gordon. I think there are a lot of respects in which, an actor, in order to portray a character, that an actor can only use his own history, his own emotions, his own experience. And then you filter and edit and you cobble together a kind of character. But really the fuel is your own life, it's your own experience. And so you look for emotional relationships between yourself and the character. And I found John Thornton to be a very sympathetic character. He was a man who was looking for really important answers in his life. And in the context of his relationship with Buck, he found new strength, new purpose, and that is the essence of the character for me.
Mr. Ford,
Star Wars in American Graffiti. Played a small part in American Graffiti, so George and I knew each other. But I had a strategy at that point in my career. I went back and forth. I became a carpenter. I educated myself in carpentry and worked on houses, built houses, and various carpentry projects. Was a contractor finally, but I would go back and forth from movie to carpentry. And for me, carpentry was a way of not taking every acting job that came along, because I didn't want to do some of the silly episodic television stuff that I had been required to do when I was under contract at Columbia Pictures. I spoke about that earlier. And carpentry gave me another way to put food on the table for my family. So I would go back and forth. And I was asked by a friend of mine who was Francis Coppola's scenic designer to install a elaborate entrance to Francis's offices, because he couldn't find another Finnish carpenter to do it. I said I would do it, but I would only do it at night because I didn't want people walking right through it and everything. And I also didn't want to be a carpenter, a movie director's office. But I was working late one night, and sweeping up and cleaning up the job. And George Lucas walked in with Richard Dreyfuss to begin the interviews for Star Wars. And I suppose my being there at that time was a bit of serendipity. And they asked me later if I would do them the favor. I never had a proper interview, but they asked if I would do them the favor of reading with the other actors who were testing for the parts. And so, so I said, well, okay, do that. And then at the end of this whole process, they asked me if I wanted to play the part. That's the story in a nutshell.
Thank you. Bernardo